Alright, welcome back to another web development video where I show you how to make modern websites using HTML5, CSS3, and a little bit of JavaScript. In this video, I'm going to cover just very briefly how I created this digital bookshelf. Now, I posted this on Codepen earlier this week, the end of last week, I think earlier this week. And you can see that we have two different shelves here. This is a nice drop shadow. Essentially, I was looking on Dribble for some ideas for something, and I saw this bookshelf, and I thought, I wonder if I can recreate that bookshelf using code. A lot of times, I don't always know what to try or to experiment or to build, and so going and looking at designs, because that's normally the workflow for a web developer, is someone's going to hand you a design or a wireframe or something, and you don't typically just start writing code out of thin air. So you have a direction, you have something, a goal, something you're trying to hit. So I'll often just go and look at stuff or look at elements and see if there's something new or creative or something that I could try to learn how to code. So I was looking and I found this bookshelf, and I thought, I wonder if I can recreate a digital bookshelf. And so I think I got pretty close at least to what the design was offering. There's some books also that were sitting on the bookshelf. Maybe I'll show you that at the end, but I just wanted to show you how I do the drop shadows for the bookshelf and how I set up the bookshelves. I'm just going to clear these out and just get rid of them. So the bookshelves are not there, and we're just going to rebuild them. Okay, I thought this might be the easiest way to do it. So you can look at the code in the Codepen and just see what I was doing, but I just wanted to recreate them. So I have two things. I had the shadows, which are behind, and then at the foreground I have the actual what you would call the shelf, the strip of white. So we have to do a couple things. We have to put those two things on top of each other. Here's the code. They're just right next to each other on this bookshelf. And so what we have to do is make each of these position absolute so that they're stacked on top of each other and they're not going to go anywhere. So that's the first thing, is we need to make them position absolute. Let me get some coffee. On a side note, I hope you're taking care of yourself. Everybody's sort of in strange circumstances right now. And then for each of these, a lot of these are going to be the same. A lot of the different elements of the bookshelf and the shadow are going to be the same. So we're going to say a height of, we'll just say 1 rem is fine. And then we really need to settle the position. So we're just going to say a top of, we're going to say a top of 0 for now, and we're going to say left of 0. And then we're going to call the width like 80%. That way it doesn't take up the full width of the viewport. So actually we could do a bookshelf. And we'll say the width of the bookshelf is 80 viewport widths, and then now we can make this 100%. So it's taking up 100% of the bookshelf, and the bookshelf is only 80, basically 80%, 80 viewport widths wide. Okay, so this is sort of hard to see. So let's just let's attach a background color here. Again, I'm using Sass, so it might look a little different when you're writing vanilla CSS, but hopefully you can follow along. Sass is pretty close, just doesn't have the brackets and the semicolons. we're just going to give it a very light color just so we can see where it is on the page. And it's up here, so that's not exactly what we want. So let's just move this one down to 50% and move this one down to 50%. That didn't help us out, did it? Oh, it did. So the height is 100 viewport heights. Sorry, just need to set that up a little bit. So it needs to take up, the bookshelf needs to take up at least, we'll say 50, because we have two. So because this bookshelf, it needs a height on it, because once you take these out of the flow, they don't count anymore, right? So you have to give it sort of a height so that you can see everything. But if the height here is just auto, then there's not technically anything forcing space, because these elements are no longer position relative or static. They're absolute, so they've been taken out of the normal workflow of the document. So now we have to give this an expressed height in order to make this work. And then let's see, can we just do margin auto? Okay, so we've centered up our bookshelves a little bit. That was a lot of work just to get those where we needed them to be. Okay, so we're working on our bookshelves here. So you can see down here what I've done. There's a border radius on them, just a little bit. And just to soften up the edges of them a tiny bit. You can't really see it very much, but it was enough that I needed to go back through and make that change. And I did it on the shadows, and I did it on the shelf itself. Okay, and so here, here's where sort of the magic of all this comes in, and you won't see it yet, but you will see it in just a moment. So we're just going to say the z-index of this one is going to be 1, and we're going to call the z-index of this one 2, and we'll probably have to change that in a minute. Actually, let's just go ahead and do 3. So the reason I'm doing 3 is because I had actually slotted in these books, this book grid here. I had slotted the book grid in between the shadows, because the shadows should be in the back. The books should be in between, and the shelf should be out front. So that's sort of how I was thinking about it, because if you don't do that, then the books wind up, especially the way it is here, in this source order. So the book grid, it'll put the books behind the shadow, and so the shadow of the shelf is actually going to be over the top of the books, which is not what we want. We want the books to be in the middle. So the shadow to the wall, the books in front of that, and then the shelving in front of that. So you have to sort of think, when you're doing three-dimensional things like this, you got to think spatially. How do things look in the real world? You know, when something is 4 or 5 inches deep, then there's depth there now that you have to think about. You know, things are being ordered on that shelf. So just got to kind of think about how light falls, how things are ordered on a shelf. So that's where I was going with that. So we have our z-index, and then the last part is going to be our box shadows. Okay, so I'm just going to take this, and we have 2 different shadows, if that makes sense. So we have shadow here, and essentially I'm just going to put this here and just sort of walk you through it. Okay, so now you see there's a basic shadow on here. If we remove our shelf, then you can still see the shadows. It looks like it's white here because the shadows actually bring it out from the background. So when you do box shadows, this is one shadow. So this is if you've done them before, this is a very familiar syntax for that. I don't know if you know, but you can actually layer shadows. So you can create really complex types of shadows by layering one on top of the other. And so let's see how complex they are and sort of where I started. So we'll rebuild the shadow. So this is the first shadow. So it goes up -5 from 0. There's no X, no horizontal shadow, only vertical. There's a 3 pixel blur, and then the spread, or how far out it spreads, is 0. So this is going to be sort of a fine line with just a tiny bit of blur on it. I'm using not black, but I'm using sort of a medium gray, and then a very low opacity. So when I'm doing SAS, it allows me to do RGBA colors like this. So if you looked at this in the debugger, which we can, we'll be able to see this color. So you can see this color right here. So I'm looking at the shelf shadows. So when you click on this color, I'm in Chrome, but you can see here that it gives me the RGBA, but it also gives me a hex. So if you're just using vanilla CSS and you want to include an opacity, this is sort of a new CSS3 thing, then you can look down here in the color picker and it'll actually show you. So if you have the AAA, if you add 3.3 at the end, it's going to give you this opacity. Now if you changed that opacity to say 0.5, now you get a different ending there. So if you need to convert things and you're not writing in SAS, you're writing in just vanilla CSS, or you just need to get that color and it doesn't allow for RGBA methods or anything like that, then this is one way that you can do it. So you can just go into the color picker. You can choose the alpha transparency that you want. You can also choose the, you can see here that it changes in real time. So if that's what you were looking for, or like this, then you can actually, just pull this hex color like that. Okay. So we have our first shadow here. And then in order to chain our box shadows, we just put a comma, and then I'm going to show you the second one. So now we have our first shadow. That was a little one on top here. And then now our second shadow is down underneath, and it is 15 pixels down. The blur is significantly different from here, so it's a much softer shadow. Still no spread. I didn't see the need for a spread. Same color, but a little bit more intense alpha, because if I did 2, it would come out super duper light. Because we're blurring it so much, it needs a little bit more color. So it's a 50% transparency. But what I was thinking is, partly I'm looking at the design that I'm given, and this is how it is. So the shadow is a little bit softer underneath than it is on the top. But also, if you're thinking about how light hits a shadow, and this is sort of getting into the material design. If you look into material design, they actually put materials on a table, they lit it, they move the light around to see how do things respond whenever you put semi-three-dimensional things in a space. So if you stack cards on top of each other, or what does an envelope look like whenever you're moving light around it? So they actually did a ton of work in order to create the material design look that you see with Google, because they were just studying how does light hit real things, and then how can we represent that in a two-dimensional space, so that it's not fully 3D, but it's somewhere in between 2D and 3D. So it's very interesting. You should look it up if you're interested at all in design or product or just learning more about how the world works. So we have this underneath shadow that's super soft. And then I thought there needs to be another shadow here, like just like this one is close to the bookshelf and it's a little harder. There probably needs to be a little harder shadow right underneath. So not really far away, but you know, as light gets farther away, it's going to disperse a little bit and it's going to get softer. But the light right next to the thing should create a little bit of a harder shadow. Okay, so we want to just create that illusion of more depth in the shadows, and so that's why I included this last one. So the last shadow is sort of hard, and this is kind of assuming that the light is coming from the point of the light is probably here. You know, it's not quite dead on in the middle, so that all this gets lit up, but it's a little bit above, and it's kind of an optical illusion. You probably wouldn't have this particular shadow. So there's a little creative license here. Because to get this shadow here, the light would have to be coming down at a pretty good angle, and you're probably not going to get this back shadow, honestly, if the light is coming down at the angle that you need to get this. So there's a little creative license here. But the idea is it's a little bit darker close, and then you get this nice shadow underneath. Now, if you wanted to draw that out a little bit more and to really pull that out a little bit more, the shadow, you can increase that, and then maybe increase the length. That's not it. Increase the spread. Yeah. So you can work with these things a little bit. You could see what 15 looks like. So that gives you a nice dispersion under here, and then you still have your nice color under the lip of the shelf, but it's not quite as pronounced as what I had. So that's really what I've done, is I've just sort of played around with the values until I got into the area that I wanted. If you wanted to create a complex shadow for the top as well, it might be a little bit distracting because there are books up there. So you don't want to make it too distracting on that part. But you can certainly make it a little bit more distracting on the bottom because there's nothing down there. So, and then I just essentially recreated this look for the shelf. And when I did that, it really pronounced everything a lot more. This would be, now that we have the shadows, we can just make that white. You can make it a different color, you know, a very soft white. So now the shadows are very pronounced. If you didn't like that pronounced look, you could just take it off of the shelf part and only leave it on the shelf shadows. So now this is a much softer look than what I was giving. So let's add the books in. So we come up and we just comment out our books. Sorry. Okay, and the reason that the books don't work is because I have all this stuff commented out. So let me just bring that back in. I'll just talk through this book grid. So now we're going to get some issues here because I've made all of this relative to the wrong thing. I have there, you can see here, I've got the positions a little bit messed up. So let's work on the positioning of the shelving. Okay, bookshelf. we're just going to get rid of this. That was for demonstration purposes only. And then we got to work here. So instead of top 50%, we want to say bottom, because we want to make sure that this goes down to the bottom of this to the bottom of the container. Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So our container is the bookshelf, right? So the books and all the book shelving are actually inside this container. This container is position relative, so that any absolutely positioned elements inside this container here are going to, excuse me, they're going to position themselves relative to the bookshelf container, not to the body or something outside of the bookshelf container. And so we have everything relative to our bookshelf, which is all of these three items together. This is another bookshelf, a separate one. So you can see we have two bookshelves. This is just an unordered list with images in it. And I just randomly pulled some book cover images. Now for the book grid, I made it a z-index of 2. Remember I told you we need to think about how to stack these things on the page so that one is behind the other. If I take this off, then it's very subtle, but you can see right there how that shadow, it jumps behind, and now when I take that away, it jumps forward. It's super duper subtle. You can't really see it right here. And you can't see it very well on some of these others either. It's down here somewhere. But it's really subtle. If I bump up the shadow on the shadows to like 8, it becomes way more pronounced. So now you can see that this shadow is in front, and whenever I add the z-index back in, it'll pop to the back, and you see the books come to the front. Okay, so that's what I'm talking about, how you need to think about there's distance on that shelf, and how am I going to create the illusion of some distance on that shelf. So the shadows need to be in the back, the books need to be in the middle, and then the shelving needs to be in the front. So that's how I created that illusion. We'll just bump that back to 2, and you can see it's just, you know, ever so slight back there. You could do even -10 and see if that is a better look for you. It gets a little distracting at some point. So that's 5 seemed like a good place for me to settle. Have a shadow, but it's not that big. And then what else? So I've actually translated the books a little bit. They were, because they're all sort of coming down to an imaginary baseline down here, and it was just pushing them too far. So I just pushed the books up a little bit, the whole grid. So it raises it 15 pixels toward the top of the page. And I used a grid, CSS grid, to lay out the grid for these. And then I just justified them to the center so that we centered everything up inside the section here. Without that, it defaults to the left edge, I think. Is that right? Maybe I don't need it. Yeah, I did something else somewhere that helped that. Okay, well, that's something that's not necessary. All right, and for each one of these, I did margin auto. Maybe that's what is doing. Yeah, that's what's doing it. So it's centering. Each of these is taking up 1/3 of the space here, and so it's only taking up the left side, and the images don't quite fit because I've given them an express width and height. They don't fit that space. So you can see that they don't quite fit. So if this is the look you're going for, like a left aligned, then that would be really good. But I gave them, we can even do our justify content. No, doesn't work either. Okay. I know that you can align each item. You could say align self to the center. That doesn't work either. Maybe that's why I did margin auto. Okay. So when you have an expressed width on an element and you do margin auto, it should center it up inside of its element, as long as it's a block, which I did set all the images to display block. If you don't do that, you get a weird sort of thing underneath, which you can't really see. But if you see a little white space, it's 1 or 2 pixels underneath an image. If you see that and you want to get rid of it, you just put display block on the image element itself. And what else? Oh, there's a little bit of a drop shadow just behind each one. If you take it away, you can tell that everything's a little flatter. But I thought, this is a book leaning against a wall, sitting on a shelf. So there needs to be some sort of shadow that's back there. So I put that up there, and you can't really tell it when you have it, but when you take it away, it's really noticeable. And then the last part is I give each book an expressed width and height, and then I use the object fit property. Now the reason I needed to do this is because each book is not the same size. You can see here how they all changed a little bit. This one here is taller. I think this one is taller. But when we add the object fit, then everything just sort of fits correctly into a predefined space. So this is a sort of way of masking an image. And so the image dimensions are going to stay one size, but we can use sort of background cover, background image cover techniques, like you do with a hero image or a background image, and it covers the entire container. This is the same concept, but it's actually at the image level. It's not a background image. This is a real image. So if you need to make sure that all of your images are coming in at the same size, you have dynamic content that's got multiple sized images, and it's going to throw off your layout, then you can do the object fit on the image and then do cover, and you can do a lot of the positioning and things like that you can do with background images, but it allows you to sort of crop out the images so that they're all going to come in the same size. Gives you a little bit more control over layout with dynamic content especially. And I have no control. I didn't go through and make these images. I just grabbed their URLs for the sake of just teaching. So I just went to Google Images and pulled in the image URL because I'm not using this as any sort of production anything. But if you were using this for production, you would be able to, in a graphic design program, make sure that each one is the right size that you want it to be. But if you don't have control, you can use object fit, and that helps everything in your layout to sort of stay together. So now they're all the same size, regardless what I bring in and what size that image is. It's going to be the same size as its peers. So that is essentially how I did the digital bookshelf. Hopefully it was something in there was helpful to you. It's working with shadows is sort of a new, designers are moving that way, so you need to learn how to work with multiple shadows. One of my favorite things to use is it's called material. Let's see if I can find it. Here it is. If you just search for material design shadows, it's on here somewhere. Here. So it's on Codepen, so you can search on Codepen too. But it's called Material Design Box Shadows. And it's really cool. He's put together this pen, and each card tells you, so this is this one has a hover shadow. You can see that the shadow changes whenever you hover. So it's got a nice, like small, like it's close to the back, but when you hover, it comes up. The others don't have hover states, but you could certainly use these shadows, and I've done so before. But you can see that the shadow is different on the top than it is at the bottom, and all of these are complex. At least two box shadows put together. Okay, because you have one that's sort of dealing with a top, so to speak, and then one that's dealing with the bottom. But they're different opacities, different same color, but different opacities and different spreads and stuff like that. So just generally, if you're looking for a nice shadow to put on something, this is a great pen. I've hearted it. You can check it out here. And it's by Samuel Thornton. So material design box shadows. And if you don't know how to do setting up, you put a transition on here, a nice cubic Bezier transition, so you can learn that too. But the shadows are the important thing that I come back here and I looked for this, and I use it all the time as a baseline. There are other box shadow tools online. If you just say, create a box shadow or box shadow tool, I'm sure that you'll be able to find 2 or 3 different real-time ones where you can just look and move levers and get the shadow that you want, copy that CSS and put it right into your file. All right, hopefully this is helpful to you. And this is the digital bookshelf that I made this week. If you have any questions or comments, leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll get back to them as quickly as I can, usually same day. I'm connected. And if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and click the bell, and you'll get notifications each time I post new videos. I've had a couple videos this week, so even though I'm working from home, I'm still able to record and do those things. And I think that's it for now. I hope you're taking care of yourself and taking care of your families, and try not to go too nuts, not being in the office, or not being able to go do too many things that you've been able to do before. Make sure you're talking to people and hanging out with people, talking to them on the phone. It's good for your health, good for your mind, it's good for your body. All right, and I think that's it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again next time.